And I'm live. Okay, um, this is a midnight post. It's very, very early in the morning, approximately 2 o'clock. And I just thought I'd share a few of the thoughts that are running through my mind based on the observations I'm making of the life we're living at this present time. Three things I'm going to talk about are European culture, the roles we each play in the world, and thirdly, the very clear idea to me that we are heading to a new way of life. First of all, European culture. Why European culture? I'm a person of African origin and I'm talking about European culture purely and simply because for the last 500-600 years, it's been the dominant culture in the world. And by its activities, it has drawn in the rest of the world into its memes, its patterns, and its direction. This has given the average person of European origin a false sense of superiority. They almost feel as if this world is theirs to control, direct, and drive at their whim and fancy. And a lot of this has been done with eyes wide shut, as I like to call it. Wide shut because there are so many truths which are screaming for their recognition, but which they willfully either are ashamed to face or are afraid to face. I can never work out which it is. Perhaps it's a bit of both. And still, they continue. I think it takes a bit of life experience, either that or enormous intellectual power, to see what the trends are. I didn't get it till I was north of 50. Until then, I just followed a narrative that was played out in the media, that was maintained in societies, because most of that time I was living in the West. And it followed this philosophy of living in frank and total denial of very ugly truths that keep coming back to bite us in the bum. The first one is the rapacity of Western civilization. Adam Smith talked about the invisible hand behind economies, that ran markets and so on. Well, European civilization, looking back over the course of my lifetime, there's been an invisible hand or hands running the activities of mere mortals and men, apparently from behind a curtain, giving the sense that the vast majority, I'm talking 99% of people in the world, in the Western world that is, have been puppets on the end of the strings, which are being jerked around by these invisible hands. Now, I don't care what name you call them. I don't care whether you call them the nomenclatura. Some people call them the Illuminati. Some people call them the Bilderbergers. Some people call them the 1%. Whatever it is, there is an elite few with inordinate control of power in world affairs. And because over history, it's become shameful for people to clearly own their hegemonic powers. They kind of act in a very self-effacing, very philanthropic apparent way to hide their motives, but there is no doubt about it. Their motive is to command and control at any cost, and this is where it gets sinister. First World War, estimates are 10 million people died. I still remember the stories of big battles like Verdun and the Somme, where It was almost as if the human beings who'd been, I know more about it from the British point of view because that's a sort of history. I learned, but they'd recruit people into what were called pals brigades, so that the people from your town or village or hamlet would be put together, because the idea was that they would fight harder if they had their mates beside them to encourage them and so on. Anyway, these pals brigades and so on would be formed into bigger military formations. And at that time, the machine gun had been invented. And the format of warfare was one of trench warfare, or that's how it bogged down to be. And you'd get the officers kind of blowing a whistle, and along, say, a 3, 4, 5 mile line of terrain, all of these men would climb out of their trenches, walk across no man's land. Nobody ran because you were too far away. You'd be exhausted by the time you hit the enemy. They'd walk across no man's land, and then the people on the other side would basically have two kinds of fire to start off with. First, they'd have snipers, and the job of the snipers was to identify who the officers were and from a distance shoot them. So the price, in terms of the officer corps, was horrific. Meanwhile, the job of the machine gunners was to just basically decimate the people who were walking across no man's land. Here's the thing, the machine gunner is killing human beings as if they were insects. And the rate of fire of these machine guns was so awful that the people would just be cut down in swathes. Then there's the oncoming trooper who would be shot if he turned and ran, as would be the natural human tendency. But of course, he'd be buoyed up a little bit by the fact that Tommy was standing next to him, and Tommy used to go out with his sister, and they all grew up from the age of 10. And so he derived a bit of comfort from knowing that his old mate was there with him. And 2 minutes later, they'd both be slaughtered by either machine gun fire or artillery fire or sniper fire or whatever. This was, in the plain light of day, utterly barbaric. To what end? They called it the war to end all wars. A few years later, 20, 30 years later, an even bigger war came along. This time, the major addition was air warfare and tanks, which made warfare incredibly mobile and long distance. So from 1939 to 1945, the whole of Europe was absolutely cut to ribbons. The estimations are that maybe between 60 and 80 million human lives were lost. Now, from another perspective, that actually sounds and feels like an active attempt to depopulate the world, though I can't possibly go that far. What is certain, and the point I'm making with this notion that European civilization is incredibly rapacious, is that even though all those people died, a few people made enormous amounts of money. Now, as long as a civilization has an underlying desire or need to command and control everything, two things happen. There is no end to the notion of power, command, and control. You will control everything and you won't stop. There is no end point to that kind of control. Secondly, it is incredibly rapacious of resources. Life, the natural environment. For example, it's this rapacity that drove Western civilization to places like Africa, the Far East, because Western countries only had very limited material resources, and so these resources had to be taken elsewhere and then justified after the fact. The fact is that they had no right to go anywhere else except for the fact that they wanted to command and control, and that is European civilization. The second thing that it occurs to me as is that when you meet a person or a culture that is as rapacious and control freakery, into control freakery, you get infected. And I found it curious that the Japanese people who, up until the Meiji Restoration, up until its contact with Westerners, I think they must have been the Dutch to start off with. Of course, they would fight among themselves, there'd be kind of internal power struggles and so on and so forth. But it was when Japan came up, butted up against the West, that its notions of militarism were just shot through the roof to defend itself initially. Then, secondly, to realize that to be in competition with a rapacious society, you had to become rapacious yourself. And so their little adventure into imperialism started. They needed the resources that were available in Russia, in China, and Japan became toxic to anybody who was in their environment, just as Europeans became toxic to anybody who was in their environment. So it looks as if this thing is of rapacity is actually infectious. Now, look, if you're of European origin, this isn't an attack on you as a person. I'm talking about a system which has drawn, look at me, I don't look very European in origin. This system has drawn everybody into it that it's come in contact with. And whereas it's left people of natural European origin feeling somewhat superior, I think that this is the most dangerous and shameful period in human history, purely and simply because of the negativity that it's imposed. And now I tend to understand why so much of Western political philosophy is about liberty and freedom. Who wouldn't want liberty and freedom in a system that is effectively at the Battle of the Somme, at Arnhem, at D-Day, at the invasion of Russia, the battle for Stalingrad, the war in the desert, the battle in Burma, Pearl Harbor? Who would not want liberty from what is a culture which is effectively a meat grinder? You feed in humanity and resources at one end, and it churns it out into ground meat on the other side. Something which is beautiful is fed in, and it comes out as this kind of amorphous blob of consumed resources. Then, after doing that, this very same culture decides that, whoops, we've gone too far. Let's put a full handbrake on this. Let's do an emergency turn. And that is exactly what COVID feels like. It feels like their opportunity, likely engineered, to make an about face, to make a turn, because those people who are the invisible hand behind everything realize that, well, they've gone far enough down this road. If they continue, there won't be anything left. So the rest of society has to become, again, the meat that's going to be ground up to make whatever it is that those who are in charge want. I can't help but say it. If you honestly think that this worldwide vaccination campaign, which can only get ramped up, is either necessary or about less than or just about dealing with this virus, which is 99% survivable. You're stupid. Stupid or in denial. The same way Western civilization has always been in denial of its worst excesses. Jewish Holocaust, 6 million human. I mean, personally, I've never understood it. 6 million people killed on an industrial basis, with studies on efficiency as to how many you could murder in a day, and people rewarded for doing this. But European civilization didn't understand that it was caused by racism. And so racism still persists today. And European civilization is in total denial of the fact that actually the Jewish Holocaust was just one of various holocausts that Western civilization has created, from slave trade, the Congolese Holocaust, the Namibian concentration camps and Holocaust, and so on. And actually, if you go to the Rwandese Holocaust, virtually every conflict in the world has had an invisible hand behind it, egging it on. Simple reason. If there's one of me and 5,000 of you, the only way I can beat you is to get the 5,000 of you to be fighting each other. Then I can take my jolly old time and pick you off one by. In fact, it would be boringly easy, but that has always been the state of play. Now, of course, technology has been a byproduct of this rapacity. But the technology has largely been directed to making the society more rapacious, better at war, better at conflict, more efficient at killing, more efficient at controlling people. So the technology which is used to puff up the chests of people of this civilization is itself its greatest Achilles heel. Now, it's easy to bitch about the person who's in charge. I mean, the people who sit in Parliament are an easy target. There are a few hundred of them. They're very visible. We've given them the power to make the laws so that they take responsibility effectively for us. So it's easy to moan about the dominant culture of the time because it's in the lead. The mistakes are for the dominant culture to make. But I would say that we each, member of the dominant culture or not, have a part to play. And when you're frustrated, as I often am, at the rampant injustices that are flying around the world, I mean, anybody who thinks about vaccinating small children as is the new activity, anybody who thinks that putting an experimental biological agent into a human being and rewarding them with a lottery ticket, as is happening in, I think it's in Grenada, or it's one of the Caribbean countries. In New York, somebody was being offered a burger and fries, and the mayor was out there kind of promoting this. There were parts of America in which people were being offered spliffs for getting the vaccine. So you get stoned after having this experimental biological agent stuffed in your arm. I look at this and I despair. That's the sort of thing that frustrates me and makes me want to walk down the street and shake everybody hard across the shoulders and say, "Can't you wake up and see what is going on?" Then, of course, there's the censorship and the very clear fact that the only thing you want to censor are either state secrets in a time of war or something which is truly despicable. Now, because this isn't a war that's going on, the censorship should fill everybody with disquiet, the people who get deplatformed for putting an alternative point of view, and so on and so forth. If you don't understand that something sinister is going on, again, I only have one word for it: you're stupid. But then you realize that actually, you know what? There is no point in abusing anybody and judging people for the conclusions that they arrive at, because we each do what we know best to do. Definitely, human communication is one way of straightening a train that has run amok. And I speak, I talk, I write a little. Other people are artists. And it's actually when I think of art that I say to myself, don't judge anybody. Because my favorite artists like Lantern Mills, Wiz Kudawa, Bloody Glover, Modigliani, Picasso, Van Gogh, woof, Rene Magritte. These people, I look at their work and it lights me up in a way in which nothing else can or does. They're not words, they're shape, color, texture, presentation, and yet it's a language, it's a very articulate language, way articulate beyond words, which does something for you. And I feel as if when the art lights me up, it gives me the desire to proceed. It's like it's a lift. So I just mentioned that as an example of the fact that we each contribute to this matter of chatter and talking to each other and forming human connections in different ways. So we have to really try quite hard. I'm saying this maybe more to myself than anybody else. We have to try really quite hard not to judge other people's positions in this unless they are visibly toxic. Now, there are those in the front line in this matter. People in the front line include scientists and journalists. It's the job of the journalists to check the politicians and to report information and to provide context so that you and I can make our minds up. People who take in the news. When the journalist is partially or fully owned by the powers that wish to blind us, then the journalist becomes the concentration camp guard. And he can say, or he is likely to say, I was only doing my job, I was under orders. Well, it's a little bit like a fighter pilot getting his wings, going up to intercept an enemy plane and deciding when he's up there, I don't want to shoot this one down because he might die and he's probably got nice children and a wife and so on and so forth. When you sign up for a particular role, you need to do that with your eyes wide open. That's the first thing. Second thing, scientists and the doctors. I know how hard they went through school. For a strange reason, a lot of my friends were medical students, and I admired and loved them a lot. And they were generally kind of brighter than the rest of us, certainly harder working. And they had a sense of responsibility about them very early in life, owing probably to the fact that they were being trained to take decisions that would lead to life or death very quickly. And so they had the kind of sense of responsibility. There was something about the medical students that kind of put them a little apart from the other people. And so society has always accorded doctors a huge amount of respect. And of course, they've got this thing called the Hippocratic Oath, which says, first do no harm. So, yeah, they were in a kind of exalted position. Now, you don't have to be a doctor to realize that the doctors are, again, behaving a little bit like concentration camp guards. And they're saying that, well, look, I'm just following the orders of the Ministry of Health or my professional body or whatever. And if they don't follow those instructions, they'll get struck off. And imagine, they've worked like dogs to get to where they are. To lose it just like that, when 9.9 out of 10 of them know nothing about the creation of this pandemic. So a lot of them are towing the line, and it is quite clear to all of us. And again, I think there will be a reckoning going forward in history. There will be a massive reckoning for this. And they drew the short straw. It was like being the soldier at the point at which the invading army came through. They drew the short straw. But there are consequences for their unfortunate placement in that position. So, still, it applies this notion, let's not judge people, because each of us does what we know to do. But it brings me to my last point now about kind of a new way of dealing with our present difficulties. I think the only thing that can protect us is our humanity. And as I've said before, an elevation of our consciousness. Because what the invisible hand will try and do is tell you that A, there's nothing you can do. B, shut up. C, keep your head down. D, just do as you're told. Well, that would be the soldier climbing out of the trench towards the enemy when the officer blew the whistle. I think it's a definition of humanity in itself to have agency. And certainly for people of African origin, I would say it would be the extremity of stupidity for us to observe the events in Europe without taking a couple of pointers and a couple of cues. The Europeans are in this because they have no choice. It is of their making. Because Europe is so dominant, everywhere it goes, it sucks. It's like a whirlpool. It's, when this whirlpool moves, it sucks things into its center, and before you realize, you're going down the same plug hole as European civilization is going. But this is where I think it behoves those who aren't in the epicenter to think for themselves about technology, how the technology is used. And I think it is owing to the period of colonialism that so many people have been what I call second level brainwashed into doing and thinking as Europeans do. The difference is the Europeans got privileges. They are rewarded for thinking and being the way they are. Racism, for example, is one of the most egregious outputs of the rapacity of Western civilization. It is run on a hierarchy which rewards some people purely on the basis of the color of their skin, not on talent or ability or anything. But without the philosophy of race, you couldn't possibly galvanize enough people to turn a blind eye to whole swathes of humanity being treated like insects. You couldn't possibly do it. If Europeans suddenly grew a conscience and thought, hang on a minute, steady, 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 steady on. We can't go into foreign countries and create regime change, destabilize governments, manipulate their markets, lead them willfully and by design into debt, impose sanctions which will destroy their economies. Why? Because if you stop doing that, the Congo would become the world's richest country in a very short while. Now, most people aren't, most people want to be nice people, but they're not prepared to be that nice. So racism is a casual and natural byproduct of Western civilization and its rapacity. And of course, everybody lives with what is ugly by having their eyes wide shut, to the point where they are absolutely able to convince themselves that A, they don't know what's going on, which is willful, and B, they personally aren't like that, but they're perfectly happy to take the benefits of their civilization being like that. They don't give the benefits back, or they don't give their privileges to other people. And indeed, they're very resistant to those privileges being leveled up or shared across the board. So the new way to beat this rapacity, this command and control mentality, is to make the humanity our true north. If a person's a human being, their life has worth and value. And to do that, we have to raise our consciousness beyond that. I'll do this because I want to do it. Two, I'll do this because it's the right thing to do. The shift in paradigm is absolutely enormous. And really, when that raising of your consciousness occurs, nothing's the same again. The first thing that happens is you refuse and fail to give permission to anybody to abuse you. You don't agree with it anymore. And once you disengage from that relationship, the other party the only way the other party can overstep their bounds is to be the frank and obvious monster they want to be. It's a little bit more difficult. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you step outside the herd. When you step outside the herd, that's when you see in clear contrast how your value is and how the herd self-values itself. Its power lies only from the fact that everybody else is walking in the same direction. That is something people who have humanity have to develop, because once you have the sense of your humanity, if we connect with each other actually nobody can do anything. Yeah, all of this craziness has to. It has to. It just has to stop or change. Look, I don't know what some people think. I'm actually not a Luddite. Today I was reading about transhumanism, and it absolutely, totally, and utterly freaked me out. But like everything else, change is difficult. What a humanist would object to is change by stealth because it is fundamentally disrespectful of the humanity of the individual. If we, as a human civilization, decide that this is where we're going, bring it out into the open. Let's have the conversation. Let us frankly decide if our current medical strategy is what we want. I don't need to agree with what we decide. All I need to know is that I've heard all the information that's out there, had the opportunity to speak freely, so that I have made my input into the process. What I don't need to feel is that I'm some kind of muppet that's been told what to do, and I've been deceived into making a decision which otherwise I might not have made. So I am not I'm not anti-tech. I actually find technology very exciting. I find it clever. I find it creative. I find it enhancing of so many things. I think technology is a very human thing to aspire to want, and to develop. What is a very animalistic thing to do is to do things by stealth, and that's exactly what these people are wanting to do. And of course, that they don't have permission to do. And I would hope that after watching this long ramble of a video, that you would think to yourself also that, look, no, you can go so far and no further. Last thing I'll say is that if you possibly can, rather than staying mute, this may be difficult because you might even live in a household in which your partner has the opposite point of view. It's, this thing is that personal. Well, nobody on this planet, not my father, not my mother, not my children, not my partner, is going to change my humanity or my sense of it. Nobody. That is a responsibility that is yours and yours alone to bear. Unless you want to be somebody's poodle, in which case, good luck to you. So there we are. That's me thinking aloud. If I put this on YouTube, please subscribe because it enables me to produce more content. And please share this and offer your comments below. Try and make them non-toxic because we're all looking for solutions. And this is frankly not for those who are not looking for solutions. Neither is it for people who are so frightened that they need to keep their eyes shut. Thanks very much for listening.